crash-landed together. The human was her only hope. Impact zone. The ion storm hit without warning, turning the star-filled void around Nick 7 into a writhing mass of electrical fury. Commander Zara Voss gripped the controls of her military transport as lightning danced across the viewport, each bolt threatening to tear her ship apart atom by atom. The evacuation had been going smoothly until this. 47 refugees from the Outer Rim conflicts safely aboard, heading for the Sanctuary, worlds beyond the war zone. Warning. Hull integrity compromised, the ship's computer announced in its maddeningly calm voice as another surge sent sparks cascading from the control panels. Zara's dark eyes, hardened by 6 years of combat missions, narrowed as she fought to keep the transport stable. The refugees behind her were silent now, their earlier chatter replaced by the tense quiet of people who understood they might die. "Emergency landing protocols engaged," she called over the intercom, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Secure yourselves. This is going to be rough." The ice planet's surface rushed up to meet them like a white-fanged maw. Zara had seconds to choose between a relatively flat glacial plain and what looked like a series of rocky outcroppings that might provide better shelter. She chose the rocks, betting their lives on her ability to thread the needle between jagged peaks. The impact drove her forward against her restraints hard enough to crack ribs. The world spun, metal screamed, and then everything went black. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the taste of blood and the bitter cold seeping through the transport's fractured hull. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the passenger compartment, where Zara could see the refugees stirring. Miraculously mostly uninjured thanks to the ship's excellent safety systems. Her own body was less fortunate. Sharp pain lanced through her left shoulder every time she moved, and she could feel warm blood trickling down her forehead. "Everyone sound off," she commanded, pulling herself upright with her good arm. A chorus of voices responded, scared but alive. 47 souls still under her protection, now stranded on a planet that could kill them in a dozen different ways. The ship's environmental systems were failing, temperature readings dropping steadily as the hull breach let in the planet's brutal atmosphere. Zara activated the emergency beacon and began organizing the evacuation to what remained of the cargo hold, the most intact section of the transport. They had maybe 6 hours before hypothermia became a real threat. She was sealing the last of the emergency rations when she saw the light. Through a gap in the transport's twisted hull, a soft blue-green glow pulsed in the distance like a lighthouse, beacon cutting through the swirling snow. Another crash site. Zara grabbed her sidearm and emergency kit, leaving her second in command to organize the refugees. "Stay here and keep everyone warm," she ordered. "I'm going to investigate that light. Could be survivors." The journey across the ice was treacherous, wind-driven snow cutting visibility to mere yards. Zara's combat boots found purchase on the frozen ground as she pushed forward, following the mysterious glow. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air, each exhale feeling like it stole a piece of her body's warmth. What she found defied her expectations entirely. The vessel wasn't built so much as grown, its organic curves partially buried in a snowdrift, like some massive seed that had taken root in the ice. The hull was translucent in places, revealing complex internal structures that pulsed with that same blue-green light. As Zara approached, sections of the ship's surface rippled like water, responding to her presence. And then she saw the alien, the being stood nearly 7 feet tall, its form humanoid but clearly not human. Skin that seemed to be made of living crystal caught and refracted the ship's glow, creating patterns of light that shifted across its surface like aurora. It moved with fluid grace despite what were obviously injuries, tending to damaged sections of its vessel with long, delicate fingers that sparked with small electrical discharges. When it noticed her approach, it froze, turning to face her with eyes that held depths like looking into clear mountain pools. For a moment, neither moved. Zara kept her weapon lowered but ready, every instinct screaming warnings about first contact protocols and unknown alien capabilities. The being spoke, first its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones rather than her ears. The words were meaningless, a flowing language that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. But the tone was unmistakably questioning. Human, Zara said slowly, pointing to herself. From the transport that crashed. She gestured toward where her ship lay hidden in the storm. The alien tilted its head, crystalline features shifting into what might have been understanding. It touched its chest with one luminous hand. Lyrian, it said, the word carrying that same harmonic quality. Thale, Lyrian Thale. A name, then. Progress. The creature, Lyrian, gestured toward its damaged vessel, then at the storm raging around them. The meaning was clear. Neither of their ships was going anywhere soon. When Lyrian pointed toward a series of rocky formations in the distance and made what was clearly an invitation, Zara found herself nodding before her tactical training could. Object. The caves Lyrian led her to were a marvel of natural architecture, crystalline formations creating chambers that seemed to channel and amplify the alien's natural luminescence. The air was warmer here, heated by some geothermal source deep below. As they settled into what appeared to be the main chamber, Zara activated her communicator. This is Commander Voss to Refugee Transport Actual. I've made contact with an alien. Survivor, we've found shelter. Transmitting coordinates now. The response crackled through heavy static. Acknowledged, Commander. Weather's too severe for immediate evacuation. Estimate 18 hours before we can extract you and the passengers. 18 hours. Alone with an alien whose intentions she couldn't begin to guess, responsible for 47 lives sheltering in a crippled transport. Zara had faced worse odds, but rarely with so many variables. Lyrian seemed to understand the situation without needing translation. The alien moved through the cave system with obvious familiarity, touching certain crystal formations that responded by increasing their glow and warmth. Within minutes, the chamber had become genuinely comfortable, the crystalline walls creating a shelter that felt almost alive. You've been here before, Zara observed, though she knew Lyrian couldn't understand her words. The alien's response was a gesture toward deeper passages, combined with sounds that might have been explanation or simply recognition of her observation. The first real test of their partnership came with the sound of howling from outside the cave entrance. Not wind, something alive and hungry. Zara's hand went to her weapon as shapes moved in the storm beyond, predators drawn by the scent of warm-blooded prey. Lyrian's crystalline skin flared brighter, patterns of light racing across, its surface in what was clearly distress. The alien pointed toward the cave entrance, then made slashing gestures with its hands, while emitting sounds that were unmistakably warnings. Ice wolves, Zara muttered, recognizing the territorial behavior, even if she'd never seen the creatures before. Pack hunters probably adapted to this frozen hellscape. Her sidearm would be effective, but ammunition was limited. Lyrian approached her then, moving slowly with hands visible in what was clearly meant as a peaceful gesture. When it reached out to touch her injured shoulder, Zara's first instinct was to pull away, but something in those deep eyes stopped her. Compassion, perhaps, or simply the recognition of shared danger. The touch was warm, sending tingling sensations through her wounded flesh. To her amazement, the sharp pain began to fade, replaced by a gentle warmth that spread outward from Lyrian's fingertips. Some kind of healing ability, then. Another piece of the puzzle that was her unlikely companion. Outside, the howling grew closer. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The first of the ice wolves appeared at the cave entrance like a nightmare-given form, twice the size of any earth wolf, with fur that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed with predatory intelligence. Its breath created clouds of vapor in the cold air as it tested the sense within the cave. Zara raised her weapon, but Lyrian's hand on her arm stopped her from firing. The alien moved forward, light patterns shifting across its crystalline skin, in rapid sequences. For a moment, it seemed like some kind of communication was taking place between Lyrian and the wolf. Then more wolves appeared, and the moment of potential understanding shattered. These were hunters, and the cave held prey. The pack leader snarled, revealing teeth like frozen daggers, and charged. Zara's first shot took its center mass, the energy bolt sending it tumbling backward with a yelp of surprise and pain. But its packmates were already moving, flowing into the cave like a tide of fangs and claws. Lyrian's response was immediate and stunning. Light erupted from its hands in controlled bursts, creating barriers of crystalline energy that deflected the wolves' charges. Working together without words, they established a rhythm. Zara's precise shots keeping the pack at bay, while Lyrian's light constructs channeled the wolves toward kill zones. It was elegant and deadly, two completely different fighting styles meshing into something greater than the sum of their parts. When the last wolf retreated into the storm, leaving two of its pack dead in the cave entrance, Zara and Lyrian found themselves breathing hard and staring at each other with new respect. "Not bad for our first fight together," Zara said, knowing her companion couldn't understand but needing to say something to acknowledge what had just happened between them. Lyrian's response was a sound that might have been agreement, accompanied by a gesture toward the deeper caves. There was more to explore, more to understand about this place and each other. As they moved deeper into the crystalline passages, Zara realized that 18 hours might not be nearly enough time to unravel the mystery of her remarkable companion, or to understand why being stranded with an alien felt less like a crisis, and more like the beginning of something important. The caves held secrets, and so did Lyrian Thale. She found herself looking forward to discovering both. Bonds forged in Ice 3 weeks on Nix 7 had transformed Commander Zara Voss from a military officer following protocol into something she barely recognized. A woman learning to communicate through touch, gesture, and the strange harmonics that seemed to bridge the gap between human and crystalline consciousness. The rescue that should have come in 18 hours had been delayed by cascading ion storms that made space travel impossible. Her refugees were safe in a geothermal facility Lyrian had helped them locate, but Zara had chosen to remain in the caves with her unlikely companion. The decision had raised eyebrows among her crew, but Zara couldn't explain the pull she felt toward understanding Lyrian Thale and the mysteries hidden in the crystal depths. What had started as duty, protecting a potential ally, had evolved into something far more complex. "The patterns are changing again," she said aloud, knowing Lyrian would understand her tone if not her words. Over the weeks, they'd developed a hybrid language of human vocalization, crystalline harmonics, and shared gestures that allowed surprisingly sophisticated communication. Lyrian's response was a sequence of musical tones that Zara had learned meant curiosity mixed with concern. The alien moved to the cave wall where new crystal formations had been growing, their luminescence shifting through spectrums that didn't exist in human vision. Lyrian's own skin flickered in response, creating light patterns that seemed to communicate directly with the living rock. Through careful observation and Lyrian's patient teaching, Zara had discovered that her companion wasn't just a scientist, but something closer to a biocrystalline engineer. The caves weren't merely shelter. They were a living system that Lyrian could interface with and modify. Over the past weeks, their simple refuge had transformed into something approaching a small habitat, complete with improved heating, water purification, and even primitive manufacturing capabilities. "Your people built this place, didn't they?" Zara asked, running her hand along a section of wall that felt almost organic. The question had been building for days as she noticed the too perfect integration between Lyrian's abilities and the cave system's responses. Lyrian's harmonics shifted to what Zara had learned indicated deep time, ancient history. The alien gestured toward the deeper passages they hadn't yet explored, then touched its chest and made a sound that suggested both belonging and loss, homecoming and exile in the same expression. Their morning routine had become comfortable, Zara checking the perimeter sensors she'd rigged, while Lyrian tended to the crystal gardens that provided both light and a kind of atmospheric processing that kept their air fresh. But today the sensors were screaming warnings. "We've got company," Zara announced, reading the displays. "Big signatures, moving in coordinated patterns. Not the wolves." Lyrian's skin flared bright white. The color, Zara had learned, meant immediate danger. The alien moved to a section of wall and pressed both palms against it, harmonics rising to frequencies that made Zara's teeth ache. The cave responded, crystal formations shifting to create viewing ports that showed the terrain outside. "What?" emerged from the blizzard was unlike anything from their previous encounters. The creatures stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs that ended in claws capable of cutting through ice and stone. Their hides were armored with natural plates, and their heads featured arrays of sensory organs that suggested intelligence far beyond the simple predators they'd faced before. Territorial guardians, Zara breathed, recognizing pack behavior that was less hunting and more systematic patrol. They know we're here, and they're not happy about it. Lyrian's response was complex. Harmonics that conveyed both acknowledgement and something that might have been guilt. The alien moved deeper into the cave system, gesturing for Zara to follow. As they traveled through passages that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate their movement, Lyrian began what was clearly an explanation. The musical language was beyond Zara's ability to fully comprehend, but certain concepts came through. Ancient responsibilities, broken agreements, and consequences that had been building for longer than human civilization had existed. These creatures weren't just guardians, they were the original inhabitants of this cave system, and Lyrian's people had displaced them eons ago. "So you're not just hiding from the storm," Zara said as understanding dawned. "You're hiding from them, and now they know you're back." The passage they followed opened into a chamber that took Zara's breath away. Crystalline structures rose, like frozen trees toward a ceiling lost in shadows, each one pulsing with patterns of light that seemed to contain information. This wasn't just a cave, it was a library, a database, a living record of knowledge that stretched back millions of years. Lyrian moved to the central formation, a pillar of crystal that stood twice their height and hummed with barely contained energy. When the alien placed both hands on its surface, the entire chamber erupted in light, revealing the true scope of what lay hidden beneath Nix 7's frozen surface. The visions that flooded through the crystal network were overwhelming. Vast cities, of living light, beings of pure energy working alongside creatures of flesh and bone, technologies that bent space and time to their will. And then the war, a conflict that had consumed entire star systems and left survivors scattered across the galaxy, hiding fragments of their civilization wherever they could find sanctuary. The sundering, Lyrian's harmonics carried grief that transcended species barriers. The alien skin flickered through patterns that told of loss beyond imagination. Not just death, but the destruction of knowledge, art, and connections that had taken millennia to build. Zara understood now why Lyrian had been alone in that research vessel, why the alien had seemed both familiar with and exiled from this place. Lyrian was a keeper, one of the last guardians of knowledge that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. The sound that interrupted her thoughts was like the earth itself groaning in pain. The guardian creatures had found another entrance to the cave system, and they were not interested in negotiation. Their calls echoed through the passages, challenge, and demand combined into something that made the crystal formations ring like struck bells. "They want you to leave," Zara said, reading the situation with military precision. "But they won't let you take anything with you." Lyrian's response was a sequence of harmonics that conveyed impossible choice. The knowledge stored in these crystals represented the last hope of rebuilding what had been lost, but accessing it would mean violating the territorial rights of beings who had sheltered it for millions of years. The first guardian appeared at the chamber's entrance like a mountain come to life, its sensory organs tracking both intruders with predatory focus. Others flanked it, creating a wall of armored flesh and calculated menace. But as Zara raised her weapon, Lyrian stepped forward with empty hands. What followed was a conversation in harmonics so complex that the crystal formations themselves began to resonate in response. Zara couldn't understand the specifics, but she could feel the emotional weight: apology and request, explanation and plea. Lyrian was asking for something that went against everything the Guardians had been created to protect. The lead Guardian's response was a sound like glaciers breaking, ancient authority challenged by desperate need. But then something unexpected happened. The creature's sensory organs focused on Zara, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When it spoke again, The harmonics included frequencies that somehow she could partially understand. The human chooses freely. Zara looked at Lyrian, seeing her companion's crystalline features arranged in an expression of hope and terror. Whatever was being offered would change both their lives irrevocably. "What are they asking?" she said, quietly. Lyrian's response was music and mathematics combined. Partnership, knowledge sharing. Two species becoming something new. The guardian creatures weren't just protecting the crystal library, they were its other half, living processors capable of integrating and applying the stored knowledge in ways that pure information could never achieve. What Lyrian's people had lost in the Sundering wasn't just their civilization, but their symbiotic relationship with beings who could turn theory into reality. And they need a human because? Perspective. Innovation. The chaos thinking that creates what ordered minds cannot imagine. Zara holstered her weapon, the decision crystallizing with military certainty. Then let's do something that's never been done before. What happened next defied every assumption about consciousness, identity, and the boundaries between self and other. The crystal network reached out to her as Lyrian's harmonics guided the connection, while the guardian creatures provided the processing power to make sense of three completely different forms of awareness attempting communication. The sensation was like drowning in light, every memory and experience suddenly accessible to minds that thought in ways her brain couldn't process. But instead of being overwhelmed, Zara found herself becoming more than she had been. Human intuition, amplified by crystalline precision and ancient wisdom. When the connection stabilized, she was still herself but expanded. Lyrian remained distinct, but they now shared understanding that required no translation. The Guardians maintained their separate identity, while offering their capabilities, as willing partners rather than hostile protectors. 3 weeks later, when the rescue ships finally broke through the storm barriers, they found something unprecedented. A human military officer working alongside alien scientists to establish the first tri-species research station in known history. The crystalline caves had become a laboratory, where three completely different forms of consciousness collaborated to solve problems none could address alone. Zara stood at the cave entrance, watching the rescue shuttles land while Lyrian prepared to present their discoveries to representatives from 3 different galactic civilizations. The refugees had long since been evacuated, but she was no longer the same woman who had crashed on this frozen world. "No going back now," she said, though the words carried no regret. Lyrian's harmonics conveyed agreement tinged with anticipation. Together, they had found something worth the risk of everything they had been before, a future built on connection rather than isolation, understanding rather than fear. The galaxy was about to change, and it had started with 2 beings learning to trust each other in the depths of an alien winter.